Okay, welcome all to this Avanti One partner webinar. Today we are presenting alongside Avanite, one of our premier Avanti One partners. A couple of introductions. My name is David Shepherd. I am the AVP for Sales Engineering in EMEA. And alongside me today, I have Peter Jones from Avanite, CEO and owner of Avanite. We're just waiting for the slides to jump up on the screen if you're not seeing a slide at the moment. So bear with us on that one. But it does give me a chance to introduce Pete without any distractions on the screen. Pete and I have actually worked together in a previous existence. So it's good having Pete on today. Feels a bit like old times, and it's going to give us a good opportunity to discuss what Avanite offers, and hopefully on the call you'll see where it fits in with the Ivanti unified IT messaging, and kind of the addition and the huge advantages it brings when you introduce Avanite into the Ivanti world that you may have or on its own as well. So, without further ado, hopefully Pete, you can hear me at this point.
I can, thank you, Dave.
Excellent, welcome. I did have a jittery moment there where I couldn't see your slides, but by the power of WebEx, we're all seeing it now. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand to you, Pete. I'll probably throw some questions in along the way as I think about them. We'll try and make it a bit interactive and a bit discussion based. If you're on the line and you do have a question, please enter it into your Q&A box. We're going to try and answer the questions kind of as they come in as well. So not kind of leave them all to the end, kind of as you think about it, you ask, and we'll kind of take a pause and we'll answer that. Hopefully that's all right with you, Pete.
Absolutely.
All right, excellent. Okay, so look, without further ado, let me pass to Pete, and let's see what 6 steps to better WebData Control is the official title. So let's see what we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who came up with that title. Thanks. Yeah, it'd be good to be working with you again, Dave.
Yeah.
It's been a few years since we've been working directly together.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of give a bit of background, really, and sort of just flash up this slide to give a bit of an intro. So I imagine everybody on this call is very familiar with Ivanti, what they do. I think the name has now sort of taken in the industry from the sort of the roots of the Landesk and Heat acquisition, and before the combined sort of the getting together of Ivanti. Landesk acquired a company called AppSense, which is where Dave and I used to work together. I used to have a role where I was pretty much the architect for the Environment Manager product in one way, shape, or form. And I crossed over with Dave, working with some of our sort of larger customers over there. Since then, I've moved on. I moved into basically starting Avanite as a company, which originally was intended to be sort of a premier consultancy outfit, but we moved on in the world and we moved towards this idea of trying to make the world a better place through some software that we had an idea for. So it's based around the idea of the web, managing the web in end-user compute environments, and just trying to add value to customers. So we are looking at the idea that the whole sort of the world has changed over the last maybe 10 years. The internet's been around for a while, but I think things have really got into sort of full swing maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. And now we seem to live in this world where there is a multiple browser strategy required for most organizations. I'm still active doing a bit of consultancy here and there. I operate mostly in a CTO role here at Avanite, and as part of customer engagements, I'm finding that maybe sort of 50% of applications are now based on the web compared to sort of the traditional Win32 apps. So we're trying to look at the concept of how do we manage this multi-browser sort of situation we have, and can we introduce the idea of web app management in this sort of digital era, the age of digital transformation. We have some cloud-based reporting solutions today, living in Microsoft Azure, and we're looking at the whole concept of how we add security, monitoring, and management around the browser. So step one, I suppose, linking back to the title for the webinar, is rethinking the importance of the browser. If we look at this slide here, we used to have Windows 7, we maybe had some Windows XP. Some people may still have both of those things in use in their enterprise today. And Internet Explorer was probably the primary browser, but most applications were Win32. Maybe 10 years ago, they were 80% Win32 apps, and they were just common off the shelf. So COTS means common off the shelf. If I actually had to sort of go back and look that one up.
Just to stop you there, did you just invent that acronym, or is that an official acronym? It's a new one on me too, by the way.
Yeah, I think we came up with it whilst we were talking about it one day, and because of the length of it, we sort of acronym put it into an acronym, and then yeah, I think it's a thing. I honestly believe it's a thing. Yeah. So if it wasn't a thing, it's now a thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and back in 2008, I think, so CRM, we're talking about sort of the standard CRM applications, 12% of those were based in the cloud, with 88% being on-premise. If we fast forward to sort of today, we've now got a change or a shift in that. So maybe I should have a Windows 10 logo on there because everybody is doing a Windows 10 migration in some way, shape, or form. And along with Windows 10, we get another browser. We get Microsoft Edge. And we're about to get another one from Microsoft who are developing this Chromium Edge. But fundamentally, the shift has been away from sort of this traditional Win32 application towards consumption of SaaS-based applications. They dominate what happens with users throughout the day. And it's now moved to 87% of CRM systems are based from the cloud, or as a SaaS application accessed through the browser, and 13% are more sort of traditional applications. So there's definitely been a shift. So that makes me sort of, I'm talking to customers quite often about trying to rethink about how important the browser is to their strategy moving forward.
Pete, just a question on that. Do they come to you with advice on which browser to use at that point as well? Are they looking for that kind of efficiencies there in terms of, you know, which would be, you know, the best browser, or does it not make a lot of difference?
So this is a good question, really, because I don't advise on what browser to go with. I just recognize that we do not have a single browser which we can deploy, which meets all of our needs. So that tends to come from, so if we think back to the XP Win 7 world, we had Internet Explorer 8 and Internet Explorer 9, which were probably the most prevalent browser in the enterprise for maybe a 10-year period. Could even be like slightly more than that. So as organizations, whilst we were moving our sort of attention to browser applications or web-based applications, SaaS-based applications, we started writing our own apps, and we were writing them for the browser. IE was used 70%, 80%. It was the browser of choice for the enterprise. And we were latching on to technologies which were provided through that browser, through Internet Explorer. So things like browser helper objects, ActiveX controls, Java, and then sort of in later years, Silverlight. These were technologies which were pushed quite heavily through Microsoft. Browser adoption was king. And we wrote applications that then became very dependent on Internet Explorer. Most organizations I talk to now, most customers we have shifted their primary browser to Google Chrome. So Chrome is now probably accounting for 70%. And Internet Explorer is around 15, 20, 25% in the enterprise. That's the best stats I have, and that was from a chat with the CTO from ControlUp, who have some interesting metrics around who's using what browser for what purpose. So I don't tend to advise people what browser to go with, but all I know is that Chrome is being adopted for performance. reasons. It is faster, it renders better, but there is still a dependency on some of the more like legacy Internet Explorer browser in most organizations. Does that cover your question, Dave?
Yeah, understood. Yeah, definitely. It's good. It's good insight, man.
Okay, so what I'm seeing is that everybody, or I've not come across anybody who is deploying a single browser across their estate. They have multiple browsers. They have what I would declare to be a multi-browser strategy. And that is going to be the case, I think, for the short to the mid-term. Windows 10 brought along with it Microsoft Edge. Microsoft tried to push that very hard, but if I'm brutally honest, I think the fact that they're looking at a Chromium-based Edge browser is that they've admitted defeat with their first go, the Spartan Project Edge browser. As organizations, we're also looking to try and maximize our return on investment from this investment we've made into web apps. So a lot of us have probably purchased web-based applications over recent years, trying to replace our legacy Win32 applications in a drive to maintain compatibility with newer operating systems. So Ivanti are very good at the whole Windows 10 migration story. They can help you sort of gather your data, bring it all together, migrate your user personas across, and deploy new operating systems. And as part of that, we're finding that some applications aren't compatible. They don't work. We're going to have to remediate some of those applications. So what I find people do is they go straight to the conversation of, is there a SaaS-based, web-based application that does what we need to replace that old legacy application? And that's sort of a trend that I'm seeing. So Gartner are sort of predicting that we also have this continued growth of SaaS. I think with the sort of cloud world that we're living in today, the massive growth year on year of cloud platforms, the SaaS world is also growing, and Gartner say it's going to continue to grow at 400% a year. So I look at that and say that the browser is going to become more key, a more key element in the future. I've even talked to customers where they have a desire to become entirely browser-based. They don't believe that an operating system is required. Maybe 5-10 years from now, it will all be based around the browser. So, step 2, is understanding what your browser does, or what your various browsers do. So most web browsers are written around the concept of things called RFCs from the Internet Standards Commission, and they work in different but very similar ways. So as they interact with web servers that exist around the world, whether that be on the internet or on internal servers, or SaaS-based providing servers, they will be generating data which live in your user profile, and they do that by default. They have very hard-coded behaviors in terms of how they handle and render web pages and the various different elements that consists of. So we end up with cookies stored inside our profile in various ways, shapes, and forms. So Internet Explorer and Edge tend to store them either on the file system or inside something called the web cache. I won't go into that. I'll get very technical very quickly and probably bore a lot of people. So cookies are stored in databases, generally by Chrome, by Firefox. They're stored in different databases by Internet Explorer and Edge, and depending on your operating system, whether it be server or desktop-based operating system, and depending on the version of those operating systems, they are stored in different ways. But fundamentally, they are being created pretty much from every website you access. I think I heard some fact around that which says that the average internet website will generate 20 cookies.
In terms of cookies, Pete, very topical, not just because they make you hungry, but in the fact that over the last, 18 months, we've seen a lot of kind of even get into mainstream news where, websites, you hit a website today, it's the first time I've hit it, I'll get a disclaimer at the bottom, agree or disagree about cookies. And I don't think I've ever hit no, because I want to get to that website. I want that banner to go, so I just hit agree, which is me kind of, I think, saying, please take what you need from me, put on my machine whatever you need. Have you seen has that changed any behavior for you in terms of the use of web browsers over the last, in an enterprise environment? Has anything much changed there, or is it still standard behavior of a cookie that still exists today?
I could probably talk for about an hour on that topic, but I'll give you a few key bits on that. So I do quite a lot of demos around our software, and one of the bits of our software is what we refer to as web data management. And to build a demo like that, what I do is I've automated it, because it was very, very labor intensive, painstaking to do that manually. So we've automated that through some PowerShell. And what we do really is we sort of just initiate a remote connection to a virtual machine, and we say, in that session over there, please browse 10 random websites from maybe the Alexa top 1 million websites. As part of that, we don't actually interact with the session. We do not accept any of those sort of banners that you're talking about. And I still end up with a good few thousand cookie files in my profile, or maybe about 10,000 actual cookies from a large number of analytic and tracking and advertising companies, probably Google being the main offender there. So that whole banner thing was driven by the implementation, or the sort of the law, coming to law of the GDPR regulations. And the first thing I noticed after GDPR came in, there was more cookies than there were before GDPR, because Facebook decided that they needed one, which was never on my radar until GDPR, and then suddenly became like number 3 in the world. So there's actually more as a result of GDPR, because each of those banners also creates a cookie to record your preferences in terms of acceptance or not. Yeah.
So no real change other than potentially an increase in cookies.
Yeah, I think there's an increase. I think there are things afoot in the world around the whole e-privacy regulations, which may change that moving forward. There is definitely some noise in the world of the sort of internet to say that that acceptance box should work. It shouldn't just be ignored and deliver all the cookies to your machine before you choose accept or deny. It should honor your choice before, or rather after you make your choice, rather than just doing it anyway and then waiting for you to either accept or deny later. But whether that becomes a reality, it's very, very difficult to say.
So I'm right in thinking that whatever happens, that profile in a profile is just going to get bigger.
Yeah, pretty much.
Got it.
I think that, well, as web gets more complicated, as browsers get more powerful, as we introduce more technologies into the browser and the whole sort of internet, SaaS, web-based application world, we have more dependency on storing data. So there is, just going back to the slide here, we're recording every browsing history entry in our browser. And that can be quite severe when we're using REST API driven things. So Azure, for example, Azure has a portal, and that portal, where you can configure your sort of virtual machines, virtual networking applications, whole cloud implementation, is driven by REST. And every command in REST essentially becomes a browsing history entry. You know, if you really dig into someone's browsing history, which you can see stored by these browsers, you can learn quite a lot about an individual, for example. Cookies also have a limitation. They're limited to 4K, of storing 4K of data. They're more about the idea of trying to convert the internet from this. So HTTP is like a stateless protocol, and a cookie is a mechanism for storing data. So it's the enable for things like shopping carts on the internet, for sign-in to certain websites. It can remember information related to sort of like your username and your password. It can give you some information to make sure that when you browse from page to page in a website, that you remain logged in to that website. It can be used for authentication purposes, but I think 80% of the cookies, for example, are related to what I call surveillance capitalism. There's some very good books around that area if anyone gets interested in the topic. So there's been a shift as well in the browser to start storing more data in what is called DOM. So the DOM is the document object model, and that doesn't have this 4K restriction. So as applications get more complicated, as applications are starting to rely more on the storage of data to make the functionality of said web application work, the browsers are having to store things in different locations, which is then getting larger. So we have every image you download from a web page, every file you download from a web page is cached. We have a record on a storage of all our downloads. We're storing things in other areas which are called local storage, which is an alternative to DOM storage, which is an alternative to using a cookie. It's all about providing more functionality. And then we're having to use databases to make things more performance. And we're caching parts of the application code. All of this is basically growing, and it's all getting thrown into the user profile by default. Yeah. So we look at the world here at Avanite. We're sort of starting to think about it, or we have been thinking about it like this for a while. Is that the browsers are storing a profile inside your profile? Yeah. So Environment Manager, the Res sort of toolkit from Ivanti, or IWC as it's called now, are about profile management. They manage your profile, but you're sort of there's no mechanism to manage these profiles inside the profile. And what I mean by this is what I'm trying to sort of get across on this slide here, which is that we define our browsers as an application. So Internet Explorer is an application that we manage. Chrome is an application which we manage alongside our sort of traditional Win32 Office applications. But maybe we need to change the way we look at that and think that the browser is just really a portal or a sort of a mechanism or a window to accessing these web-based applications. So we've got Workday, for example, over here. We've got Salesforce. We've got the Office 365 online applications and Asana. They are web applications, and maybe we should start trying to manage the applications that our browser provides us access to. Does that make sense, Dave?
It does, yeah. And I think it's where Ivanti are going, right? We want to take everything towards the cloud, and the portal-based, the portal-based piece of what you're talking about here is it just shows the relevance, there's no getting away from the stuff you've discussed before that comes through a browser, right? It's there and it needs management.
Yeah, and I think the cloud is a sort of an operating model. It's perfect for some things. SaaS is perfect for some things. It may not be perfect for everything, but it is definitely the way that the world is moving to that operating model. So if we take this is with Environment Manager. Obviously, I'm fairly familiar with Environment Manager product. Yeah. There are some built-in mechanisms in Environment Manager for managing Internet Explorer as an application. Yeah. So just on the right here, we've got a built-in Windows settings group in EM, in the personalization side of the product, which stores the cookies and history information for, in this example, Windows 10. So there are 3 or 4 of those basically for managing IE 8 and 9, IE 10 plus for Windows 7, and then there's different ones for Windows 8 as well. So we can then create a Windows settings group. I believe that the sort of Ivanti Pro Services guys who work in the UWM space today firmly recommend using a Windows settings group to manage Google Chrome. Yeah. Chrome is becoming a bit more, how do I phrase it? I'm trying to think of a good word to describe it, but they don't like people interfering with their application. Yeah, Chrome is it gets upset when you try and inject things into it, when you try and change its natural behaviors. So as a result of that, it's becoming more operating system integrated, and they recommend handling it via a Windows settings group. So if you take these WSGs and you assign them to your users and you start logging in, so this is one of this is a sort of a graph. I don't know if you can read that, but on day one we had a sort of login of about 7 seconds. The second time we logged on, it probably went down to about 6, but then I started browsing the web. I started using IE and Chrome to browse web pages. I was probably browsing 15 web pages a day, I think, if I remember correctly. And what happens is, even with a targeted set of includes and excludes, as developed here, as implemented here, my logon time starts to deteriorate. So I'll put a caveat around it that this was done on a Server 2016 operating system where it behaves slightly different than Windows 10. We can have slightly different challenges with Windows 10, but implementing the Avanite WebData Control solution with our web data management sort of feature, that logon time, which started at sort of 7-8 seconds, ends up staying fairly static at around 9 seconds, because we start managing that browser data to that next level. We're dealing with that data. Example here is that for IE11, that Windows settings group there, which is grabbing all the different bits of the web data, like the cookies and the web cache, in larger environments where we are using, let's say, Citrix XenApp on a Server 2016 implementation, and we've got like high CPU utilization, I've seen customers with hundreds of these log files per user. So they are half a meg each, and we can have tens or hundreds of them stored inside our personalization database. So after using WebData Control, we can sort of remove that and bring it down. So in this example here, this was Windows 10. It's 110. Apologies, I clicked on the screen there. Bad idea. It's like 110 meg, whereas after, it's 15 meg. We are looking at sort of a difference between 26 megabytes of web data and 3 megabytes of web data, but retaining that same level of functionality. So just, can we optimize what we do with Environment Manager? Environment Manager is very good at capturing this data and roaming this data and giving us the benefits that it gives us in that space. We're taking only the data we need, but can we go that next level down? Can we start trying to manage the contents of the browser? Yeah. So when you're using Web Data Control, you have some benefits with the UWM and IWC products. Reduction in SQL Server storage. A lot of people we talk to sort of can halve the size of their SQL database, maybe more in some occasions. We reduce the amount of network traffic that's being generated between the clients and the sort of the infrastructure during log on and log off, because we're now only taking the data that we require from our infrastructure to our endpoint and then back from our endpoint to our infrastructure. Because we're now sending less information, and we're sending only the targeted information that we want to keep based on our sort of our web application profiles, we can reduce the host CPU and the I/O during the logon and the log off process, and that has a sort of a nice net effect of improving logon times. It's kind of done by providing granular control over that web data, so we can manage things like the web cache v01 data, the log files with it, and all the databases from sort of Chrome and Firefox, for example, and we manage cookies and DOM store information. We actually have sort of whitelisting capabilities, so we can say, look, we always want to keep data related to our Salesforce application, for example. That can have a knock-on effect with basically helping with the archiving and purging overnight routines that Environment Manager runs. So if you're trying to remove hundreds of thousands of files every night, that task can put your SQL Server under sort of large amount of pressure and take quite a considerable time to complete. That tends to impact the sort of really bigger end of the customer scale, and I can be talking hundreds of thousands of users at that point. And then it extends some of the features in the application control product, for example. So there is a browser control element to application control, and we can sort of enhance that a little bit and add some dimensions in this multi-browser space. And then we get on to sort of the user experience. So I've been talking to people quite a lot, and I think as IT professionals, we are quite used to having multiple browsers installed, using multiple browsers to access different sort of resources. I always used to have 3 browsers because I managed sort of some HP storage, I used to manage some NetScalers, and I used to want to manage some of my other IT infrastructure, if you like. And I realized that I needed 3 browsers to do that because managing my NetScaler was only possible through Chrome, I think. Managing my HP storage only really seemed to work through Firefox. So I had a multi-browser requirement years ago, and now I have probably even more of a multi-browser requirement. But users are users and they're not IT professionals. So should we be trying to sort of make life easier for them? We shouldn't expect a user to remember which browser they need to use to access which application on a daily basis. And maybe because we're providing the multi-browser access, we should think about how that impacts them in terms of their day-to-day working. So most users I know use browser favorites, for example. But if you're in IE and you favorite something and then you shift across to Chrome, that favorite is still back in IE. You don't have access to it. So we've got a couple of fairly simple features here, which hopefully help with user productivity and make things just generally simpler for users. So the browser redirection thing is the idea that we can force a certain URL or a certain application to always open in a specific browser. And I'll cover these features in a short video I want to play in a bit. So I suppose number 5 in my story here is starting to think about this data security and privacy thing, which we touched on a bit before, Dave, I think, with the cookies question.
Right. Yeah.
So the GDPR and e-privacy regulations, GDPR is a real thing. E-privacy is still in the talking about and not live phase, but I don't think it's been long before it is with us. And I've got another topic on the right, which is the idea of data leakage prevention, this DLP topic. They're all very much related and interrelated for me, because this surveillance capitalism topic I talked about before, I would suggest that 80% of the cookies delivered from the internet are related to tracking, advertising, and analytics purposes. I think Google alone are responsible for about 30 to 35% of all cookies in the world, and that is predominantly through their Google Analytics platform. So when I talk to customers about this, they say, well, I've got some technology at my perimeter. Let's say I've got a Cisco umbrella solution, or I've got a Zscaler solution, or I've just got a sort of a nice filtering list on my firewalls which disallow certain web traffic. Well, that doesn't really help with a lot of this tracking, advertising, and analytics behavior, because if I go to a website, let's just take the Guardian website in the UK, so guardian.co.uk. It's a fairly old, well-established newspaper which does a lot of its work online now. If you visit the guardian.co.uk website, you will get, I don't know, 30, 40 cookies delivered. I can't tell you the exact number. I can't block guardian.co.uk because it's a legitimate website. It's got a good reputation. It's fine. I don't have any risk for my users accessing that website. But the Guardian have implemented Google Analytics inside their website. They have implemented a variety of advertising and analytics mechanisms for generating revenue and understanding the sort of behavior of the visits to their website. I feel like I'm picking on the Guardian here, but they're not alone in this, shall we say. I would think you would find most websites in the world behave the same. So because those cookies and that data is being serviced from that domain, I can't really block it at my network layer. I have to sort of deal with it at the browser layer. And those kind of perimeter techniques don't really help us with things like secure cookies. Understanding, so cookies can be either secure or insecure. They can be, it's a very complicated topic really. There's hundreds of headers delivered with most web pages defining the behavior of it, and there are inherent security risks in some of that behavior. So we need to start thinking about how do we improve our stance towards managing browser data, managing the security around the browser, and controlling privacy, because privacy leads to data leakage. If the more you know about an individual, just because they happen to be using a work computer doesn't mean that they're not being profiled. It may mean that information about your business is leaving your business and being learned by other people in the world. It is a massively interrelated conversation. So we look at the world and say, well, how about we only try and keep the data that we need for the applications that we want? You know, we're currently working on and we'll release some functionality around the idea of filtering that content at the browser in Q4 this year. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So that's giving more, it'll give you more visibility at the browser side as well for the user. So what's tracking and advertising.
Yeah, so I think this loops back to our vision. So our vision is to be able to provide businesses with more visibility into the user behaviors with the browser. So the idea of who has accessed what website for what purpose, which compatibility mode is a website running in, what sort of legacy technology is it reliant on, which other web servers are we communicating with. If I visit theguardian.co.uk, I've probably made another 20 socket requests to other web servers which are tracking, advertising, and analyzing my behavior as a user. So maybe I should have some more visibility of that. And then maybe I should be able to say, you know what, I don't want to allow that communication to occur. I do not want to receive cookies relating to tracking or advertising. Yeah, I want to try and stop this and make sure that my web apps are the only things that I am managing with my browser. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a demo. I have fallen foul of the online live demo previously.
You don't have to admit these things, Pete. It's fine.
I don't. Oh, I thought I did. So I'm going with the full honesty approach. If you can bear with me. Can you see my screen still, or do I need to flip?
Blank at the moment.
Yeah, I'm still on PowerPoint. Okay, just 1 second. I'm just going to flip.
That's it. Yep.
Okay. So
you just need to make it full screen.
Okay. There we go.
Perfect.
So this is just a quick video, which hopefully most people are familiar with Environment Manager personalization. And this is an example of, we've got 24, 25 megs worth of web data stored in EM here.
Yeah.
Mostly that is in our Windows settings groups. And a lot of it, so 21 meg of that is related to Internet Explorer, and about 3 meg, give or take, is related to Chrome.
Yeah.
So that's with a very nice set of sort of pro services best practices implemented. So if we log in, this is Windows 10, and that logon time was captured using some funky PowerShell scenario to log different triggers in Environment Manager. It was 14 seconds to log on to that machine. It was sped up because it's a video and we don't like sitting around waiting for logons. I'm sure we do that enough ourselves.
Yeah.
So we've recorded, this was built using our sort of demo prep tool, and we've got some browsing history. So given it's Windows 10, I cannot really give you a great insight into cookies, for example, or the DOM store elements. It would take me probably a good hour to go through the technical complexity of where this data is, where it's stored, how it's stored in Windows 10 as opposed to, for example, a server operating system. But really, that data was having a bit of an impact on our logon.
Yeah.
So signing out here, WebData Control was active with a default configuration. It's not got any targeted application settings in it or anything like that, but that 26 meg is now 3 meg. Google Chrome is the top offender.
Yeah.
And IE was down to about 250 Ks worth of data. Yeah, that still has a nice impact. So it went from 14 to 8, 14 seconds down to 8. This is not aggressive web browsing. This is not web browsing over a very extended period of time. This was over sort of a period of like 30 days or so. So here we've just been logging it out to the event log. What we did, and if you look at this information presented here, this gives you an idea of the number of cookies. So let's say we browse 15 web pages a day for about 30 days. That's 450 websites, which results in thousands and thousands of cookies. So we are removing a good few thousand of those because they are related to advertising and tracking. And we're doing the same across Chrome. So Chrome has their 3,286 cookies, and we removed 3,019 of them.
Which is a huge number, right?
It is.
What are you looking for there to remove? What are the indicators for you?
So we've got some built-in logic into the product. I'll just pause this a second before I carry on. So we have a sort of a built-in list of known advertising tracking and advertising cookies. We also have rules about whether things have been accessed, modified, created, whether they have been expired. So an interesting thing about all browsers is that cookies are defined by the foreign web server administrator. So the guy who runs the bbc.co.uk website is in charge of what cookies it issues to your machine, your browser, for each of your users. And a cookie can have a lifespan, or like a half-life, if you like. And that can be set by the webmaster. So that can be between like a minute and 100 years. Weirdly, any browser that has a cookie and it sets a cookie which expires in a minute from now never ever removes that expired cookie, even though it is now completely useless, for example.
The defunct cookies just sit there forever as such, or until a purge is carried out, which is a manual process, right?
Well, there are mechanisms to do sort of broad brush resets across all of your browser data on your browser. I think what I think is different about what we do is we provide that granular control. We don't need to get rid of everything. We just get rid of the bits that we no longer need. So we get rid of all the expired ones. We get rid of all the advertising tracking analytics cookies. We then allow you to sort of say, I'd like to always keep these ones because they're useful for me. I've got a specific banking application which requires cookies. I want to always keep cookies for that particular application because they are known good. I think what I've found over the sort of last 5 years, maybe, doing this in a sort of profile management arena, is that a lot of people have been forced to not roam their browser data because of the impact on logon times, because of the impact on performance, and ultimately because of the impact on the number of support calls that they get to the service desk. It's like, well, actually what I've been doing is accumulating this browser data for months at a time, and then basically my browser breaks. So I reset all that data through a support desk call. Then it sort of goes back to normal, and then I rinse and repeat that scenario. But what some customers we've worked with have found is that they prefer not to roam browser data at all. To avoid that, it's better giving the user a worse experience with no sort of consistency of experience from day to day in a virtual environment than it is to roam it. So it was a rock and a hard place type conversation. And we try and be the sort of the nice bit in the middle that makes both things achievable. Yeah,
makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah. So literally, this just goes on to sort of show an example of where a cookie is useful. So if I go to the Amazon website, I have an Amazon account. I can sign into that, and I check this little box here. So that little box there, keep me signed in, will create me a persistent cookie. So I'm now signed in. Yeah. You can see I've been buying some rum and some ting. It was a gift, honestly. And if I sign in, WebData Control is doing its thing. It's removing all the sort of unwanted data, logging this guy back on. Still 8 seconds for our log on. And if we go into our browser, go to Amazon, we're automatically still signed in. So that was a cookie, basically. That cookie is providing that sort of remember me, remember my account details, and automatically sign me in. It's labor saving. It's nice from a productivity sort of point of view. I didn't have to type my email address and my password in. It sort of remembers me. So if I don't roam web data, I end up with more work to do when I'm trying to sign into certain elements if I customize certain web applications. So what this video is now moving on to sort of just have a quick look at our browser redirector feature. So I was talking about the concept of we've got multiple browsers and sometimes we need to use a specific browser for a specific application. So our browser redirector app will force certain URLs into certain browsers. So I've configured the product to basically put Avanite.com in Google Chrome. Microsoft.com, I believe, is forced into Edge.
That's you'd expect.
Yep. So we are just basically defining a set of rules.
Yeah.
If the URL matches this, then intercept that request. So BBC will go to Internet Explorer. I don't have Firefox on here, but it also works with Firefox as well. So if you click on a link that comes through your email, that's why I've just got WordPad to do a sort of a hyperlink, if you like. But if that hyperlink is sent to you in chat or it's sent to you in email and you click on it, it just intercepts the request and redirects it to the relevant browser. ITV.com has no rule on it, but we've told it that the default browser on this machine is Google Chrome, probably what I see as a standard. And now if I start typing into my address bar, we will intercept the request and redirect dynamically from the typed URLs.
Yeah.
Same deal here. So I'm in IE, but actually that's an Edge only URL. Let's dynamically launch Edge for you. So in theory, that could help make users' lives a bit simpler. Make life a little bit less complicated, shall we say. Next thing I'm going to write is something that really gets rid of system toast notifications when your policies are in place saying, please don't put notifications on screen.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the browser redirector feature in a nutshell.
Yeah. Look, I think from that, just looking at the demo there, the sheer amount of, well, let's just call it web profile stuff, just looking at the event logs and how much information is going into there. I mean, you were saying that was a fairly generic, 15 hits somewhere, and you know, straight away you're in the thousands in terms of just data that goes into that kind of web profile area. And then, you know, so as you know, Avanti, as you know from the past, we've always specialised in optimizing that login process for the user by focusing on the profile. But I think one of the relevant points I've taken here is the profile in the profile piece. It's definitely an additional profile within the profile, and if you're kind of not focusing in on it, then it's going to run away, and it's going to create. It's an admin headache. Secondly, probably more importantly, it's a user experience issue, right?
Well, yeah, it's all of the above, I think, really.
Yeah.
Definitely look, the reason we sort of started Avanite really was that profile management is great at doing what it says it does on the tin. It gives you a mechanism for managing your profile and all your different applications. The problem is that the way that the browsers have stored information has morphed over the years. We used to just be able to redirect our cookies onto a file server, for example. Now they're stuck in this big database. And I have the power to roam that database or not roam that database. But we can't go to that next level down and basically say, you know what, in that single big file blob of information, I don't want all of that information. What I want is the bits that are relevant to me, the bits that are relevant to my user, the bits that make my user experience better. I don't want the associated overheads with that data. I just want a solution to manage it. Yeah. And then, so I'm just going to jump back to this cop-out video that I did. And this is just a quick demo of our favorite sync feature. So if we start adding favorites onto our favorites bar, like our user might do, if we close our browser, we launch a different browser. We've synced that across into Chrome. So we created it in IE. So I used to get caught out by this all the time. I'm in 3 browsers. I bookmark something and go, right, you know what, I want to read that later. And then I can never remember which browser I was in when I bookmarked it. So it just helps with the user experience. This and the feature has like a read-only mode. So what you can do is you can enable it, and we will just capture all your favorites across all of your browsers into a central single file, which some of our customers are using to migrate from Windows 7 to Windows 10, for example.
Yeah.
If you put it onto your Win 7 estate, we capture all your favorites across IE and Chrome, and when you deploy that onto Windows 10, you then can have all your favorites available in all of the browsers you choose to install on that platform. So it sort of ties into what we're trying to talk about the concept of browser agility. So Microsoft are going to introduce a new Chrome Edge browser. Some organizations will want to move to that, I think. They kind of like having Microsoft as their default browser. They've had little choice and shifted across to Chrome. I think some people's concerns around Chrome, basically Google is what, $114 billion revenue or something last year, 98% of which is driven by advertising revenue. And one of the primary mechanisms for doing that is the Chrome browser. So really, I'm using it because it's performant and it's better than all my other choices, but I am funding someone else's advertising revenue by doing it.
Nice. Good stuff. Excellent.
So I'm just flipping back to and oh, sorry. Questions, I think.
Good stuff. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think we're coming up to the top of the hour, actually. But as I said, I think, yeah, in summary, there's just so much going on in the browser that kind of, without Avanite, it's going to impact. It's going to impact on the admin side. It's going to impact on the user side. There's obviously we've got 3 minutes left, actually, and I was wondering, from a futures point of view, what's next on your? What are the top 2 things in your mind that is the next kind of attack front for you in terms of profile and also just around the browser, really?
So I think our immediate sort of focus at the moment, where we're intending to deliver, is around the idea of introducing content filtering. That's the idea of basically being able to block certain URLs at the browser level before the request is sent, and to sort of trim and stop data being written into browser caches, browser cookie storage before it happens. So a lot of what we do today is sort of post-event. We remove data that we don't want to keep. We're going to become almost real-time and add an element of a security dynamic, for example, to the browser. And the other one, I think, is that we're going to then sort of start presenting that information back. So report on that through a web console, and then allow you to sort of look at that, use it for analytical purposes to understand behaviors across your estate, and then use that to further configure the product to refine that idea of managing individual web apps rather than managing a browser per se.
Take it to the next level, right?
Hopefully taking that to the next level.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Excellent. All right, Pete, thank you very much for that today. It's been a really insightful session, and kind of, it shows a complete different world to what's going on within the web browser. Pete's details are obviously on the screen now. We have had a question around whether the presentation will be shared. So the answer to that is yes. We'll share the recording, we'll share the presentation afterwards. Contact details are obviously available as well within that. So what I will do then to close off is say thank you again to Pete. So thanks for your time there, Pete. It's been really interesting. I'll bring the webinar to a close, and thanks for everyone's time who attended today.
Thank you, Dave.
Cheers, Pete. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.